What's going on, everybody? Kalupis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some pros and cons for the TCL Stylus 5G. Now this phone, as of the recording of this video, is unfortunately only available through T-Mobile and Metro by T-Mobile, but I'm hoping that in the near future, we're going to start seeing it with other carriers, if not factory unlocked as well. Now if you want to learn more about this phone's specs and features, be sure to check out my full review and tips and tricks videos for it on the channel. But with that being said, let's get started. So my first pro for the TCL Stylus 5G is, as the name of the phone suggests, the stylus. Now this stylus isn't particularly special per se, and in fact, I don't really even think it's that good. But that being said, it's one of the few mid-range phones, in fact one of two that actually has a stylus, so that's gotta count for something. So of course, if you're expecting to do any high-end art with this phone, then unfortunately you are going to be disappointed here because this stylus is not nearly sensitive enough for that. But that being said, for more basic activities like taking handwritten notes, scrolling, playing games, this stylus will get the job done pretty well. I especially like how comfortable it is to hold and how easy it is to get in and out of the phone. In fact, if you don't want to use the stylus, you won't even need to worry at all because it's not intrusive and it's not going to get in the way of anything. So on one hand, if you do want a mid-range phone with the stylus, this phone is one of two or so that has one. But if you don't care about the stylus, this phone is perfectly fine without it, and since the actual pen itself is conveniently tucked away when you're not using it, you can just ignore it and forget it's there. My second pro for the TCL Stylus 5G is the storage. With this phone, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and honestly, no matter what price range you're in, whether you're a light user or power user, in this day and age, you're really not going to go wrong with 128GB. Sure, there might be some situations where you're really a power user and you need more than that, but keep in mind that's not very common in this price range. And remember, there is microSD card expansion as well, and that's always going to help if you have a bunch of photos and videos, for example. And then on the other hand, if you're a really light user and you don't think you're going to need that much storage, keep in mind that in this day and age, with stuff like apps, the system, and pretty much everything getting larger and larger as time goes on, you're going to need more and more space, and a lot of phones in this price range have only 64 or even just 32GB, and in my opinion, that's really not enough in this day and age. So having 128, even if you're never going to use it, is still a lot better than running out of storage. My third pro for the TCL Stylus 5G is the display. Now in my criteria for a great display in a mid-range phone, the TCL Stylus 5G really checks off all the boxes. At 6.81 inches with an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, the display is not only really large, but it also has great dimensions, so when you're consuming content like streaming videos, playing games, whatever you're doing, things are going to show up a lot larger, and you're going to get a much more immersive experience. And even if you're just doing something really simple like reading or scrolling through social media, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. Aside from the size and dimensions, we also got an IPS LCD display that's really good quality, great looking colors, good brightness so you can see it easily outside. And remember, TCL originally started making TVs and they put that same technology into their phones, and you can really tell. Compared to other IPS LCD displays, this is definitely one of the better ones. And if that wasn't enough, we also got a 1080p resolution, so we get a nice sharp crisp image here. And while that's not exactly uncommon in this price range, lots of phones like this still only have 720p displays, so it's an extra little advantage. So in general, if you're looking for a mid-range phone with a great display, then in this price range, the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be one of your best options. My fourth pro for the TCL Stylus 5G is the processor. Now first of all, as the name of the phone suggests, we do get 5G connectivity here, and while it's not the end of the world if you don't have a 5G phone, if you're getting a new phone in 2022, I feel like you might as well just get a 5G phone. It'll give you access to the 5G network, which is growing more and more as time goes on, and of course the latest and greatest technology. So again, even though 4G is not going away anytime soon, if you really want to future-proof things, getting a 5G phone is definitely in your best interest. Now for the actual processor itself, we're getting 4GB of RAM with this phone with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. The actual performance is great. I've done all kinds of things with this phone, from normal stuff like web browsing and social media, streaming videos and music, and even playing a bunch of different games, and it's handled everything really well with no issues whatsoever. I feel like when it comes to mid-range phones, and pretty much any phone for that matter, there's a threshold where adding more and more processing power doesn't really make as much of a difference, and with this phone, I feel like it's at that for mid-range phones. So sure, while there are some mid-range phones out there that are a little bit faster, I feel like you're not really going to get that much of a difference in performance beyond this unless you go to something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra or an iPhone 13 Pro Max, or really one of those $1,400 flagship phones. So in general, if you're looking for a mid-range phone with really good performance, the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be a great choice. Now my fifth pro for the TCL Stylus 5G is the camera. Now as far as features go, for a mid-range phone, this phone has pretty much every feature you could ask for. On the front here, we got a real nice looking whole bunch much designed for the selfie camera, and this camera is 13 megapixels. We got a quad camera setup on the back with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So again, as far as features go, this phone pretty much has it all. Now that being said, some of these cameras are a little bit better than others, and to be perfectly honest, there are certain camera features this phone has that I don't really care for. But that being said, for most things the average person is going to be using this camera for, like again the regular camera or portrait mode for example, this camera will absolutely get the job done. Now that being said, if you want some more in-depth information about this phone's camera specs and features, I do have a camera tips and tricks video as well as a dedicated camera review for this phone on the channel. In case you're interested, I will be linking to it in the video description, so be sure to check that out. But now that we've gone over the good things about this phone, let's talk about some drawbacks. So my first con for the TCL Stylus 5G is the refresh rate of the display. Now honestly, this display is great in pretty much every other way, so sometimes I even forget about this, but the fact still remains. Unfortunately, this phone only has a 60Hz refresh rate, and meanwhile, I want to say the vast majority of other phones in this price range, at least the 5G ones that have similar display specs, all have 90Hz refresh rates. Even the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G that only has a 720p resolution still does have a 90Hz display, and in case you don't know, what this is going to do is basically make the movement on the screen a little bit faster and smoother. So if you're watching a video or playing a game for example, you're going to get a better experience overall, and even when you're just scrolling, it's going to feel a little bit more premium. But unfortunately, this phone only has a 60Hz display, which again isn't really that big a deal, but it's still definitely something that could be improved. My second con for the TCL Stylus 5G is the battery. Now this phone is getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 18-watt fast charging, and I will give credit where credit is due. In my experience, the battery life is not terrible. In fact, it's actually pretty decent considering what I've done with it. And in addition to this, the 18-watt fast charging is pretty good as well. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to charge up, so that's a good thing too. But that being said, a 4000 mAh battery is not the biggest battery out there, and for a 5G phone that MSRP is around $260, it's one of the few phones in this class that doesn't have a 5000 mAh battery. Now of course, again, objectively by itself, a 4000 mAh battery is not bad by any means, and again, in my experience, the battery life hasn't been terrible. But that being said, if battery is one of your top priorities, this is going to be a bit of a drawback, and honestly I don't really see much of a reason why they wouldn't give this phone a bigger battery to begin with. Now my third con for the TCL Stylus 5G is that there's no wireless charging, and I guess you could say this is sort of related to the battery too, but wireless charging is cool, and with this phone I didn't really have a whole lot to complain about, so here we go. Unfortunately, this phone doesn't have wireless charging, and I know it's not because wireless charging is too expensive to put in lower end phones, because you have phones like the Cricket Dream 5G, the $100 Visible Midnight, stuff like that do support wireless charging perfectly fine. And besides just the cool factor, it does have its uses. It's not just about not wanting to plug in a wire. Having a wireless charger on your desk, for example, is great for cable management, or say your charging port breaks. Without wireless charging, your choices are basically either replace the phone or pay to fix it. But if you do have wireless charging and the port breaks, then you can just use wireless charging instead, and as a result keep your phone for a little bit longer without having to replace it. So in general, while wireless charging isn't a feature that's going to change your life or anything, it's still a nice feature to have that I hope we start seeing in lower end phones in the future. My fourth con for the TCL Stylus 5G is that there's no 4K video recording. So with this phone, when it comes to video recording, we do max out at 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, and it definitely would have been nice for those of you who are recording a lot of videos to be able to record in 4K instead. But then again, it's not really that big a deal because first of all, phones in this price range don't usually have 4K video recording, and second of all, the video recording in this phone isn't really that good anyway. So if recording higher quality videos is important to you, this is probably already not going to be the best choice anyway. My fifth and final con for the TCL Stylus 5G is the materials. Now on one hand, I will give it credit, the build quality itself is pretty good. It doesn't feel like it's going to fall apart or anything, and the buttons feel pretty sturdy. But that being said, this phone is made entirely of plastic, and that's not really the problem in and of itself. I mean, plenty of phones out there are made of plastic. In fact, almost every phone except flagship phones for that matter. But at the same time, this specific plastic on the TCL Stylus 5G does feel a little bit cheap, and while it's not the worst quality out there, it definitely doesn't feel even remotely premium. And there's also not a whole lot of weight to this phone either, and under normal circumstances it wouldn't matter at all. But since the phone already looks so good, it's kind of a letdown when you pick it up and realize it doesn't feel nearly as premium as it looks. But those were my pros and cons for the TCL Stylus 5G. Despite some really minor drawbacks, if you're looking for a mid-range 5G phone that has a great display, really good performance, lots of storage, and a good camera setup, then the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be a great choice for you. As always, if you want to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out my full review, tips and tricks videos, and various other videos about it on the channel. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, and be sure to follow Kalupis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. But that concludes this video. I will see you in the next one.